get started. So although the world has seen much disruption due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the vital work of a unique and successful space cooperation has carried on to the benefit of humanity. We're here today to celebrate 20 years of saving lives from space through the International Charter for Space and Major Disasters. The Charter is a worldwide collaboration through which satellite data are made available free of charge for the benefit of disaster management. By combining Earth observation assets from different space agencies and others, the Charter allows resources and expertise to be coordinated for rapid response to major disaster situations, helping civilian protection authorities and the international humanitarian community. There are now 17 Charter members and 19 partners that provide contributions. To celebrate, we are very fortunate to have the leaders of the three founding agencies, ESA, CNES, and CSA, speak to the Charter objectives, breadth of its applications, and its relationship to societal development goals and its benefits. I'm Harry Sakanik, and I'm chair of the Earth Observations Committee at the IAC and recently retired director of the NOAA Center for Satellite Applications and Research, your moderator. So on behalf of the proposers, Jean-Yves Le Gall and Jim Graff, I want to welcome all of you to this lecture. We will spend the next 45 minutes hearing from each agency leader and leave some time at the end for your questions and concluding remarks. And in a little bit, the tech staff in the back will throw up the Slido slide in case you haven't experienced it already so that you can click on it and be ready to submit your questions. So before we get started with the lecture, I want to mention that we also have a companion technical session, B16, 21st anniversary of the Disaster Charter, history, status, and future of this powerful and productive international cooperation, which will have several papers from the Charter members discussing the history, current status, and future of the Charter. It's held on Friday, the 29th at 9:45 in Dubai D, the GTS room. So we hope you'll be able to join that session as well. Now I will introduce our first lecturer. Dr. Josef Oshbacher became ESA Director General on the 1st of March this year. Prior to that, 2020, yeah, it's 2021 still. Prior to that, he was Director of Earth Observation Programs and head of ESRA at ESA's Center for Earth Observation, located in Frascati, Italy. He started his career at ESA in 1990 and specialized in natural sciences, earth sciences, and observations. Josef?
So thank you, Harry, and really appreciate, first of all, that you are here for this session because we are celebrating 20 years of the Charter on Space and Major Disasters, which is really a reason to celebrate because we have learned so much and we have hopefully also done so much good for people around the world. And I'd like to, with a few slides, to show you a little bit what we have done. I know there's many slides, so I will go through some of them a bit faster because I would like really to focus on the discussion. So if you don't mind, I just highlight some of the points. So what you see, and here are the numbers, we have 17 members which are members of the space agencies which are in the Charter. They're really supporting space and major disasters of a larger scale where we have where we need to enact the Charter. And the Charter is all about programming satellites in case a disaster happens and then providing the data for free to civil protection agencies or people who are authorized to trigger the Charter. We have 247, as you see here, operational activities. We have 24/7 operational in the Charter operation itself. We have a team of a red phone type of setup where somebody can call a number and somebody will pick up the phone at any time, and disasters quite often happen over Christmas, on the weekends, so we need to make sure that there's availability and the information is at no cost to the user. Here you see some of the examples which are being addressed from cyclones, earthquakes, fires, floods, landslides and so on. So really bigger events, and I think the important message is it is not only in the countries of the members, but really globally where this information is provided. Here are some figures: 734 activations that happened since the beginning of the Charter, which is now 20 years. 129 countries have been served, 61 satellites are used to take measurements, observations from the Charter, 17 active members, 84 authorized users, and in 75 countries. And there's a distinction between the members and the authorized users. The members are the ones who provide the space assets, so who are participating in the operation of the Charter, and the authorized users are the ones who are allowed to call and to use the Charter when it is required. This is an example of Russia, also underlining that this is really a global effort. Here you see some flooding, and I think this is also showing, you see the statement here, which has been expressed by the user entity, which is typically a civil protection agency, that this is really of use in case of crisis. And what we do, we see here on the left-hand side the example of a picture. This is a composition of data before and after flooding. The bluish areas are the areas that are flooded. Of course, this is information that is immediately available to the users. You can assess, is a bridge, is a road still operational or not, and therefore you can direct your services to help people which do need help very, very quickly. Also, we work very well and very close with the United Nations, in particular with UNITAR and UNOSA. I'm sure this is very well known by you. Also, capacity building is one part of it, but also they have a network of students of Civil Protection Agency with whom we work very well, because you also need, of course, to be trained in the use of the information that is provided through the Charter. There's one example here that shows Sentinel Asia, and that's actually quite interesting, because in Asia there's been a regional hub, a regional activity set up to really provide not only the data, which are for free, the satellite data, but value-added products. And this is organized in this particular way, where they use the data and transform raw data into information of relevance to the people, and therefore is an added value which is provided through this Sentinel Asia setup. Another similar example in Europe is the Emergency Management Service. You see here the signature with the operators of the European Management Service of Copernicus. As you know, this is one of the 6 services of Copernicus which are at large scale helping civil protection agencies in Europe, and the Charter again is delivering data to the operators of this service. Another example shown here, and this is quite nice because it shows the visualization of some of the information. You see here the example of Thailand, and you can, with this lever, which is the line in the center, you can actually move forth and back between different dates, and therefore you can see the changes in a before and after situation, which is quite handy because you can immediately see what was, let's say, not flooded or not burned in case of a disaster, and then if you go to the other image of a more recent acquisition where the disaster has occurred, you see immediately which areas are affected, and it gives a very quick assessment also in a very fast and easy way. Highlights 21, just focusing on the upper part, it says that this is a partnership primus inter pares, meaning that really the different agencies that are running the Charter having each equal rights. There's not one leader of the whole Charter group, because the chairmanship actually is rotating, and you see here the more recent ones between INPE, NOAA and USGS and Roscosmos, which has been changing hands and therefore changing responsibility over these periods of time. And this is the end of my very short introduction of how the Charter works. Let me just add one more sentence before I hand the microphone back to Harry. The Charter really has been a huge success, and this is something that these 3 agencies have initiated some 2 decades ago. I was not part of the initiation process. I have the honor today to stand here and celebrate the 20 years of Charter work, but it has been a huge success, actually so good that we have picked up some of the ideas of the Charter in Europe as a so-called accelerator, where I would like to make this system even more operational, to have more data at very high resolution available to users whenever needed, with more satellites flying over. That means a shorter time between acquisition and disaster and acquisition, but also integrating it much better into a whole network where computation is part of the process, on ground but also in space, and therefore being able to respond much faster. We call this an accelerator. There are 3 accelerators which we are proposing, and one of them focuses on rapid and resilient response to crisis. Thank you very much.
Okay, before I introduce our next lecturer, what I would like to do is also remind you that you can submit any questions you have through Slido. So please be thinking about those, and we'll be happy to take them after we get through the 3 lectures. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our second lecturer. Dr. Philippe Baptiste became CNES president on the 14th of April of this year, and prior to that he held several senior positions at the highest levels of the French government, helped found and develop several startups, served as a partner in a prominent consultancy, and earlier served as a researcher and leader in CNRS. He specialized in algorithms, combinatorial optimization, and operations research and AI. Philip?
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Well, I was a professor for a bit, so repetition is key, and I apologize in advance because some of the slides will look very similar to those of Joseph. But I'm very happy to be here. This charter is really a great example of what space can do to people. So that's a very concrete example of the application of space to save lives, to help rescue people. So this is something that has been going on for years and years, and it's really very important, I think, today to explain every day that space is not only for science, not only for defense, not only for business, it's also for people on a daily basis. And it's really something which is, I guess, really very important. So, okay, so this is the timeline. So basically, the same idea of what mentioned Joseph before. So it was created initially by 3 agencies, so Canadian agency, ESA, and CNES at the end of the 90s, and this international chart for space and major disasters has been the number of people, the number of agencies joining has been steadily increasing, and I think that the United Arab Emirates Space Agency was one of the last ones to join, and we're very grateful to that. And this is quite a success, as I mentioned earlier, and because all organizations really want to cooperate. And if you have a look to the map worldwide, you can see that basically we cover many continents and countries, big countries that have been not always, that have had sometimes divergent political opinion, have been cooperating for a long time on this topic, and this is really something, again, really important. So the idea is that we make available to the charter fleet of satellites, more than 60 satellites today. These satellites have provided this year a little bit less than 10,000 images in 2020, either optical or radar. I will come back to that. And the satellites are used to produce damage assessments, to identify the areas where emergency response is required. And it's not only image, but it's also data which is processed on top of this image to really help rescue. Most of the space assets which are provided by the charter members are optical satellites, and in most situations these satellites are really the best suited assets, means to provide valuable images that can be immediately used when a disaster strikes. Of course, well, if you have cloudy days or if optical satellites are useless for various reasons, then of course radars can be used. it depends, of course, a lot on the nature of disaster, but still, it's the combination of the two tools is really something important. As a general rule, we try to combine different sensors and spread over multiple and different kind of satellites, constellations, which are orbiting on different paths, just to be able to have a lot of measure, a lot of pictures, and to be able, of course, to renew the picture in a very frequent manner. There are two, as mentioned by Joseph, there are two UN organizations which are working very closely with the Charter. They have local offices in many countries, so UNOSA and UNITAR, and they are granted the right to activate the Charter on behalf of end users that are not yet part of the authorized user communities. This is a formal list of countries that can directly activate the Charter. Of course, the Charter has more and more countries that can directly direct authorized users, and which can then trigger directly the Charter. For instance, in 2022, 7 new countries have joined the authorized user community: Cayman Islands, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Haiti, Tanzania, Togo, and Trinidad. So the list is still expanding today, and we have direct interaction with most of the countries in the world to trigger the action of the Charter. I will just use a couple of slides to illustrate what happens. So here on this slide here, you can see an example of the final product which is delivered to the end user. Here it's the damage assessment. There's a situation after an earthquake that has hit the city in Haiti this summer, and you can see, thanks to the legend and to the added value on the picture itself, then efforts can be organized immediately. So, of course, optical satellites constitute a very essential instrument as far as disasters are concerned. They are capable of long-track and off-track depointing. They can fly in constellation, and you can have a high-resolution mode, and also you can have priorities to tasking mode, and they provide very valuable image. Which can be compared, which can be archived, compared with previous situation, and you can very quickly estimate the scope of the disaster and the amount of rescue and that you have to set up. If we move to the next picture, here it is, you can see here that on top of the image itself, you have also an interpretation of the image, which is made by the agencies in the Charter and the people working for them. You can see here on the right hand side of the screen that you identify on the picture buildings that have been destroyed in red, buildings that are damaged in yellow, and possibly damaged building in white. And you can also identify places where the crowd is assembling, is gathering in several places of the city. So really, given that, you're able to assess with a very precise fashion what you need to provide as supports. So here you have another example. So it's not building, but it's a flooding situation. And you can see that on the same picture, basically you have merged historical data of several pictures that have been taken during the last few days, and you can identify with two colors here, blue and deep, or white or pale blue and deeper blue on the picture, the evolution of the flooding. So basically you can have a dynamic dimension of what happens. This is basically what I wanted to illustrate, and so once again, this is really important for people, and that's something that we really should carry on. In this sense, what Joseph said, I fully agree with that. I mean, we really have to work all together to extend this kind of services because it's very, very important to explain to everybody, I mean, to all citizens in all countries, that space is not dedicated only to specific fields, but it's really for the safety of all. Thank you very much, and I will just finish with one slide, which is very important, but has nothing to do with the charter, just to tell you to come back next year in Paris. Thank you very much.
I've seen quite a few good questions coming in, but I want to remind everybody to submit your questions on Slido. We'll try to handle a few of them in a little bit. Now I'll introduce our third lecturer. Ms. Lisa Campbell became CSA president on the 3rd of September last year, 2020. Prior to that, she held Associate Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Senior Deputy Commissioner positions in Veterans Affairs, Defense and Marine Procurement, and the Competition Authority within Canada, respectively, and specialized in regulatory work on the collection of and trade in data, including emerging business models, and in litigation in criminal, employment, and constitutional law. Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Canadian Space Agency, I'm very proud to be joining you today. Over 20 years ago, our international community recognized the potential of space to monitor disasters and support response teams on the ground. We came together to form the International Charter Space and Major Disasters to put space technology at the service of emergency responders around the world. And I'll just pause here. The slides seem to be doing something fun. There we go. There we go. With satellites able to image almost any point on the globe 24/7, space provides a vantage point to observe our land, waters, and atmosphere, and how they interact and change over time. Today, the Charter is one of the world's primary sources for obtaining space-based information during the response and relief phase of a major disaster. The success of the Charter, as colleagues have said, highlights the power of collaboration. Through our combined efforts and our collective Earth observation assets, timely, reliable, and accurate information has helped alleviate the effects of disasters on human life. This is the real beauty of space, collaborating on numerous fronts, transcending national borders, and innovating to harness the power of technology to improve life on Earth. Since the Charter became operational, it's been activated over 700 times to support disasters in 129 countries. These include major events like the earthquake and tsunami in the Indian Ocean in 2004, the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, and the Typhoon Haiyan in Southeast Asia in 2013. They also include man-made disasters like oil spills and industrial accidents. This year alone, the Charter was activated 5 times for events like these man-made disasters, the highest number since 2007 for such activations. Millions of people worldwide have been positively impacted by the Charter. The satellite data helps teams on the ground to establish quick and comprehensive assessments of crisis areas. Equipped with critical information, authorities are able to optimize how they manage the response. We can all be proud of what the Charter has helped us to achieve since its inauguration, and of how we've adapted and innovated to meet evolving needs over time. After the first decade of making satellite data available for disaster response, we realized the importance of expanding access to data to users outside of space agencies. With the introduction of universal access in 2010, we gave access to national emergency management authorities around the world to directly activate the Charter during emergency situations. The Canadian Space Agency was the Charter lead at the time. We worked with partners to coordinate a comprehensive approach to implement universal access. As a result, 17 space agencies and space system operators, members of the Charter, along with 73 national users across 67 countries, have the ability to directly submit emergency requests as authorized users. Maybe I'll just say it. I think it looks like someone else might be controlling it. Slide 5, thank you. Public Safety Canada is the authorized user of the Charter in Canada. In the spring of 2019, when snowmelt and rain caused flooding in parts of the Canadian provinces of Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, they were the ones who activated the Charter. 227 satellite pods were provided by 8 separate agencies. Natural Resources Canada used this data to produce 13 maps to support relief efforts. These maps provided critical information on the extent of the flooding and helped the teams on the ground to prioritize operations. As a founding member of the Charter, the Canadian Space Agency has been contributing satellite data in response to activations from day one. We've provided over 2,500 images acquired by our RADARSat-1, RADARSat-2, and the RADARSat Constellation mission space systems. Launched in 2019, the 3 identical RCM satellites work together. They provide daily revisits of Canada's vast territory and maritime approaches, including the Arctic, as well as daily access to 90% of the world's surface. This year, we fully integrated the RADARSat Constellation mission's fast tasking capabilities and charter operations. This has shortened the time between order submission and first image acquisition. RCM data is now one of the first data sets available on the Charter platform. We're proud to be able to contribute in a meaningful and efficient way to help those in need. We're also grateful for the times that Canada has benefited directly from the Charter. When Fort McMurray, Alberta was faced with devastating fires in 2016, the first satellite images received were those provided by the Roscosmos Resource P satellite. These Resource P images were then used by Natural Resources Canada to generate useful maps. Unfortunately, we've seen a steady increase in charter activations lately. In 2020, we saw more activations in a single year than ever before. 55 activations covered disasters in 33 countries. This is about 38% higher than the average number of activations since 2007. When it was first established in 2000, weather-related disasters, such as floods, oceans and windstorms, landslides triggered by heavy rainfall or floods, wildfires, ice or snow hazards, accounted for 79% of all charter activations. In 2020, floods accounted for 60% of all activations, ocean storms making up 12%, while wildfires and oil spills represented 5.4% each. Although these trends are concerning, we're also seeing advances in technology, like artificial intelligence and powerful computing, that promise to unlock the potential for a multitude of new cutting-edge applications to meet these challenges. There's also a growing interest of national space organizations to join the Charter. This will expand the group of satellites that make up the Charter's virtual satellite constellation and increase the quantity and quality of the data available to those who need it most. Moving forward, we're preparing to handle the ever-increasing amounts of generated data and membership and looking to integrate new Earth observation data sources, including those of our commercial partners. Colleagues, on behalf of the Canadian Space Agency, I'd like to express once more how very proud we are to celebrate this 20th anniversary of collaboration in the International Charter Space and Major Disasters. Last year, in the midst of the pandemic, we held a small virtual celebration at the Canadian Space Agency to commemorate this milestone. But it's fitting that we're assembled here today to mark and highlight the achievements of the Charter together. The Charter is an ongoing success story of international collaboration focused on saving lives, protecting property, and the environment worldwide. Despite emerging challenges, we see opportunity to expand and improve on the success of the last 2 decades, expanding membership, increasing quality and quantity of data, and advancing innovative applications. The Canadian Space Agency is committed to continuing to support the Charter for years to come and to continue to grow and innovate together while we provide disaster relief into the future. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
presentations representing a wealth of information about this great cooperation that's occurring. We've got a large number of questions that have come in, but they group around several themes. So I'm going to try to kind of integrate them together and see if we can get at the essence of what everybody is wanting to know. So one set is associated with authorized users of the charters. Lisa showed in one of her charts where they all are located around the world now. And the question is about, you know, given that there's 193 nations in the UN, which could be subject to the disaster, you know, any kind of disaster, I limit the number of users to 87. And what's the criteria to be a user? Who would like to take that?
So thank you. There's a certain, so first of all, thank you for the questions, and I think this is a very important one. In order to be also a member and a user, it applies to both categories. There's a certain procedure that has to be applied. It is all visible on the website. I've before shown you the URL, and you can get more detailed information on all the detailed criteria. But basically, on the provider side, to be a member of the charter, you need to commit that you are providing, in case of a crisis, when the charter is called, your satellites resources for free for the purpose or over the area of the disaster, and that you do provide this information. For the user, very similar. It's typically civil protection agencies, but not in all cases, as we have just seen before in the various presentations. The UN is also entitled to call up the charter on behalf of others for other countries that are not members of the charter, and this is really done with the spirit to make sure that anyone is helped, and not only those who are members or who are, let's say, in the circle of authorized users. So yes, the UN can call on behalf of any member state of the United Nations, which basically any member state, the charter, and therefore request assistance as any other member. So yes, this is, I think, a huge improvement or a huge benefit which the charter offers basically to the world.
Thank you, Joseph. Lisa would like to add?
Thanks very much. As I mentioned, you know, after the first decade of making satellite data available for disaster response, we saw you have to make it equitable. We see the utility of space in real time for populations around the world. So that's why universal access was so important in 2010. We gave access to national emergency management authorities, and we saw the uptake. And as you saw the trend line and some of the trends I described in what we're seeing it being used for, you're right, equity of access around the world is important, and that's why you know, we're working as hard as we can to make sure that we include as many people who want to use this data have access to it.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that, and that is, what would each of you say to potential providers and potential users who are not yet members to entice them to become members?
I would, of course, strongly encourage them to join, first thing. And again, I think the rationale to join is not only to benefit from it, but also, as I mentioned a couple of times in the presentation, I really think this is important to explain and to show to the people, to the citizens, that space is useful for your daily life, for your security, for your safety. And this is typically a very good example of what we can do for citizens.
Yes, I had this discussion several times over lunch or over dinner with some of the potential suppliers. The answer is very simple. If you are a company or an agency who has satellites, and in most cases, when a disaster happens, you are anyway interested to take an image over this area, and if not, then you would be interested to take an image, because then you are part of a global network to really help people and help people in need. And I think it costs you very little money and extra effort for very big support you can give to those people who really need this information. So I think it is certainly, there's a small cost probably involved in an agency or in a commercial company to do that, but the cost is so small compared to the help you can provide by giving this data for free to the community. So I think for me this is almost a no-brainer, as you would call it. This is very easy to answer, because with a very little extra effort as an owner of a satellite, you can do really, really good things.
Great, thank you. So the next set of questions is associated with commercial data providers and what's their relationship to the charter and how do they interact with the charter. Who would like to handle that one? Yeah, it's the one in blue. What's the relationship between the charter and private Earth observation satellites?
Okay, I can do it. Private entities are very welcome. Again, they have to go through the same procedure as anyone else. If they commit themselves to provide data for free in case of crisis, they are more than welcome. And there's a procedure again which is well laid out and is well possible.
And I'll just add on that. You know, there's human stories at the bottom of all of this, right? This is real impact on people around the world, on economies. So there's a shared interest in this data. And as Joseph said, for a relatively low cost, there is huge demand and need. And it's also a little bit of a prevention. It's a good idea to get the data because when you need it, you don't have much time. And it is always useful and has real impact. As we mentioned, if you look at the trend lines and what we're seeing around the world, we do expect increased demand, and that's what's been constant over the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you. So another set of questions is associated with how the service is working and where maybe there's some issues and challenges that might be addressed to improve it. So I'm going to put up one here, which is, where are the existing bottlenecks and what areas do you think the service could be improved? There's some specifics like other sensors, better visit times, more processing.
No, but I think that the answer is within the question. Revisit times is absolutely crucial because when you have a disaster, of course, usually it's not one shot. I mean, the situation is evolving within minutes or within hours, and you need a very frequent revisit. So revisit is really key. Another aspect which is absolutely crucial is also communication and the capacity to connect people. So either with space assets, it can be, you can also have other solutions to answer to this connectivity issue, but these are the two main topics that we have to cover, and I think that these are questions that are ahead of us.
Thank you. And then there's another one that's somewhat related and I thought was a very interesting one, so I'm going to put it up here. And that is, are there any plans to extend the charter to other space services that could be useful during a disaster like satellite communications?
Maybe I can start with answering to this. Today it is not planned, it is providing satellite data for free from Earth observation satellites, so this is at the core of the charter, and the charter itself is not including telecommunication services, if that is the question. However, and this is something I mentioned at the end of my talk, we do at the moment in Europe contemplate some accelerators, as we call them, which would be a combination of exactly these two applications, Earth observation on one side, with exactly to overcome the shortcomings which Philippe was mentioning, observation frequency, but also quick transmission of information to and from the satellites, and communication obviously being an essential part of it. As you may be aware, Europe is also discussing secure connectivity as an element, and these two elements, secure connectivity and provision of information through a more dense observation network, certainly are important steps to come. In addition, not just providing data, but real information is the next step, and this is something that needs to be built up. We have some ideas and some concepts to work in this direction, but this is work at the beginning. I look to my colleague Philippe, one of our important member states. This is what we're discussing right now with member states, but certainly bring this forward towards the Space Summit, which is taking place early next year.
Great, thank you. So another one that I thought was interesting as well, and I think it's somewhat related, is do you envision the charter including the private sector in the future, for example, to allow a private company to assess an oil spill? So it's on the user side.
For me, well, an oil spill is a kind of disaster, so it depends on of course, of the size of the oil spill we are talking about, but I mean, large oil spill is a kind of natural disaster, so it's typically, these could be questions that could be answered by the charter.
I think, if I may to add one comment, the important aspect of the charter is that these are authorized users who are receiving the information, so normally not private companies then to make, I would say, money out of it. This is certainly a different process, but I think this small distinction has to be made.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to go to one that talks a little bit about the future and give each of you an opportunity to maybe express your thoughts about where you see the charter headed. What's your vision for improvement and expansion in the next few years, and what kinds of things are you thinking about in terms of trying to increase its utility to humankind? Who would like to start first? Lisa?
It's been remarkable. I see the passion of my colleagues involved at the Canadian Space Agency. They're so proud of the international network and the work that's done around the world to provide relief in circumstances when it's desperately needed. And it's been incredibly flexible from an original vision decades ago to what's being done now. So I think it's shown great flexibility in response to demand, and that will probably continue.
Philippe?
So I think that we have covered a little bit two things that on which we really have room for improvement for telecommunication in case of disaster, but also frequently revisit of the situation. So this is really part of the future. I don't know how we will do it and who will do it and when, but this is something which is very important. And on top of that, I mean, I really think that we have to work on strong interaction between the charter and between all the actuators. So basically, the guys who go on the ground and how they use the information to train them to exist, not only to provide the data and provide the information, but to be sure that there is a strong connection between the data that is provided and the actions that are taken. And this needs a lot of training all over the countries.
Maybe very briefly, it says to look into the future 10 to 20 years, but let me just take one moment to mention that on the ESA side we have actually 3 experts in the room here who are running the charter and are responsible. There's Maurice Bourgeot, who is actually the ESA member of the charter board and therefore really part of building it up and running it, and big thanks to Maurice, but also Tony Dolker-Nielsen and Simonetta Kelia in the room from the Earth Observation Directorate, just in case you have more specific questions on this point. Coming back to the question which I see here, the future 20 years, and 20 years is far away. There I see a huge improvement that can be done from space. I really believe that the Charter has done a tremendous service to help people in need, but it also has its limitations, and the limitations are the ones we have just mentioned. I would see the future of the Charter certainly in an integrated system where we have a very rapid observation system with very rapid responses. That means a lot of satellites in terms of constellations that are in the air and really being over the spot when a disaster occurs, or not much afterwards. So in other words, having more frequent observation by satellites, so higher density of satellites, certainly visible and radar combined. They both have their huge advantages, but also having a much more integrated computing capability, that you are capable of computing in space, even targeting or even self-detecting a disaster. Take a fire as an example, with artificial intelligence and and cognitive cloud computing, you can really detect a fire with a sensor. You can transmit this information to maybe another satellite who takes a follow-on image of the same area, transmits the information straight down, not necessarily to a data center, but really to users, to a fireman or to a fire brigade office, so that they have immediately the information. So the timing will be much faster, much more immediate from all aspects, observation, but also communication. And this I really see as the future evolution of the Charter, maybe outside the Charter framework, because the Charter framework has a very specific nature, but in terms of capability, which is needed for the next 10 to 20 years.
That's very interesting. So you see the possibility of maybe connecting predictive information and early warning type information, maybe activating assets and so forth before they're actually called upon. That would be a tremendous capability, with the advancements that we're making now and a lot of our operational forecasting models. I can certainly see the possibility of that. It's great. Okay. Now I want to go to another kind of group of questions, which is associated with something you said at the end of your lecture, Joseph, and that is basically the Charter is a very unique management model for getting things done cooperatively all around the world. Do you see it applying to other things in the space sector? And also, what kind of lessons would you take from the experience that the Charter's had and apply to other things?
That's a very open question and a very wide one, but I could see an immediate case where global cooperation is needed, again, to help people, and this is really connected to climate. The climate crisis is a global crisis. Every country is affected by it. Decarbonization or becoming carbon neutral is in almost every country's agenda. Some a bit faster, some a bit less fast, but to make sure that we first of all not only understand climate change and its impacts, but also help people cope with it and be responsive is for me certainly a domain where another larger scale cooperation is required with connecting people and again providing information from space. Using space means to the benefit and to the service of people, and this is a big question. This is having several elements from producing information that is of relevance to call it a greener planet, to help in the decarbonization effort, to help agriculture, energy, industry, all the elements that are connected to pollution or to carbon emissions, to better manage them. And I think this requires a huge global effort. We are probably very far away still of achieving it, but with efforts like the climate agreement of the Paris Agreement, COP26 and similar initiatives, I think we are going in the right direction, but certainly reinforcement is needed. And space can be much more of use to people. I hear all the time that space is underutilized. It can be doing much more for people in countries, but also the global population, and this for me would be certainly a candidate which needs to be initiated in order to put space at the service of people.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to try that one? Philip first? Okay.
Okay, so just to mention that predictive management of crisis is really key. So Joseph mentioned fires, and of course this is typically things that you could do in space if you have enough revisit of the world. I mean, so that's but it's not only fire. I mean, you could also imagine, I don't know, so tsunami or even chemical pollution or oil spill or whatever. I mean, there are thousands of applications that you could really imagine there, and where through cooperation of nations and companies that own assets, you could really benefit to all. And this is really something, I don't know if it's within the Charter or within the UN programs that we have to develop that, but this is really something we should really push forward. Not only the management of the crisis, but also prediction and really anticipation of what's going to happen.
I'll pick up on those themes because, if we look back at the last 20 years, what has it taught us? It's shown us that it doesn't serve any of us to have limited data sets or limited access. In fact, whether you're a public agency or a commercial entity, it helps everyone to have more data and to bring the best technologies to bear, the latest that we have, so that there's equity of access, that we're able to analyze the data, see the trends, and potentially, even as you've mentioned, do some predictive analytics. So from an economic perspective, if you look at the return on investment from what we've done over the last 20 years, it's definitely shown the worth of this, and we're now seeing that it is something that's going to be increasingly important in the future.
Those are all some fantastic comments. I know I've worked closely with several people that are involved from the NOAA side, and I've seen over the years how tremendous the capability is, and also the benefit to anybody that suffers from a disaster around the world that's part of the accredited users that can take advantage of it. So we're getting close to the end of time now, so I just want to give each of you an opportunity to say any final concluding remarks that you would like to make to the audience about the disaster charter. Lisa?
You mentioned, Joseph, there's some colleagues in the audience who worked on this. I'm wondering if they could stand so that we could applaud them for their vision and their work. Are there colleagues who are here in the audience?
Everybody's shy.
They're shy. There we go. So everybody, a round of applause for the colleagues.
We have several. That's great. Thank you all.
Just to conclude, I'd just like to say that, well, this started 20 years ago, and this was really the early days, and we have seen from many examples where all this work has been really useful, and all these 20 years should really show us a way forward. So it's cooperation between nations, tomorrow's private companies, sharing assets to help people when you have a disaster, even to prevent some kind of disaster. So this is really the way forward, and really to show that space is useful for all citizens.
There's nothing more I can add. I think it was both sides so wonderfully. On one side, really to thank everyone who is running the charter every day. There's always something happening, and unfortunately disasters are becoming more frequent, so this is a huge effort by many people. And also, I would say that if I have a dream, if I have a wish that the charter is actually running so well, but we should develop it further, make it even more operational, even quicker, and go into these directions which were mentioned before, to make sure that it's not only data but information that is provided. I know that some agencies and some services are adding this, but that this is done a bit more coherently, and making sure that the timeliness and observation frequencies are improved.
Great, thank you. I think your ancestors, your predecessors in the three agencies would be extremely pleased about how things have progressed, and I think this was a tremendous session to give everybody a flavor of how great the charter has been, how well it works, and how much benefit it provides. I do want to remind everybody that on Friday, session B16, 21st anniversary of the Disaster Charter, History, Status, and Future of this powerful and productive international cooperation, which is the complimentary technical session to this highlight lecture. We'll have several papers so that you can get into more detail on it. And it's on Friday, again, at 9:45 in Dubai D, Global Technical Session Room. So I would like to ask all of you to give our panelists, lecturers, applause and thanks for their great talks. And with that, we'll conclude the session. Thank you.
shit.